Let me start with a curious question. Can anyone tell me how many elections will be held in 2024 around the world? We're talking about general, regional, and municipal elections. Any idea? Well, we're talking about 76 elections. No more and no less. Polls in India, Pakistan, Russia, Mexico, Brazil, as well as the European Parliament elections will call for half of the world's population to vote. However, I think if there is one thing we can all agree on, it is that there is one election that stands out above all others. Of course, I'm talking about the presidential election in the United States of America. An election that could end with the return of Donald Trump to the White House. Right now, it is not the most likely, but it could happen. Inflation, and above all, age, are taking their toll on Joe Biden's popularity. In fact, according to a recent Washington Post poll, 63% of Americans do not believe Biden is fit to face a second term. But VisualPolitik community, this time we're not going to tell you about President Biden. Today, we put the spotlight on none other than the figure who accompanied him to victory, Vice President Kamala Harris. Because if you think Biden's popularity is low, that's because you haven't seen Harris's ratings, in particular in news stories like this.
Column: Kamala Harris, the incredible disappearing vice president.
The most unknown vice president in living memory has become a cause for serious concern within the Democratic Party leadership. It is for one simple reason. They need everything to be, or at least appear to be, perfect to prevent Trump from returning to the Oval Office. And this is where Vice President Kamala Harris plays a particularly important role. But why? Isn't the main role supposed to be that of presidential candidate Joe Biden? Why do many already see Harris as crucial to another Democratic victory? Disclaimer, if many of you don't know Kamala Harris, I don't blame you. She's been looking more like a ghost than a vice president of the United States for a while now. But with this video, all that's about to change. Let's get started.
Kamala, breaking barriers.
Kamala Harris is one of those people whose profile seems predestined for big Washington politics. The daughter of an Indian cancer researcher and a Jamaican economist, she began breaking barriers early on. As early as 1990, she began working at the San Francisco District Attorney's Office. After graduating from the University of California Law School, during her 8 years in that office, Kamala began to build a reputation as a tough woman. Her work at the time focused on fighting gang violence, drug trafficking, and child sexual abuse. However, that would only be the beginning of an extremely fruitful career. You see, having achieved a certain reputation in the city of San Francisco in 2004, she became the district attorney. During this time, her reputation as a tough woman was enhanced after the conviction rate in the district skyrocketed during her first 3 years. Perhaps that is why, in 2010, she was elected Attorney General of the state of California, the first woman and the first African American to hold that position. Well, it was just at this point when she achieved national notoriety, especially thanks to becoming one of the main voices against Proposition 8, which banned same-sex marriages. And not only that, in 2012, she accomplished one of her biggest accomplishments, a $20 billion settlement for Californians whose homes had been foreclosed upon after being victims of practices deemed unfair by mortgage lenders prior to 2007. So naturally, following such a victory, her name began to spread like wildfire within the Democratic Party. And finally, in 2016, focusing on issues such as abortion, raising the minimum wage, and reforming the judicial system, she became senator for the most populous state in the United States, California. She was the first Indian American woman and the second black woman in the history of the Senate. And it was in this chamber that Kamala Harris made the ultimate leap into the world of big politics. She did it by asking her opponents in the hearings very incisive questions. Of course, with her popularity on the rise, her political aspirations would not be limited to the Senate. And in 2019, she announced her campaign to win the Democratic Party's nomination in the 2020 presidential election. Harris wanted to become Trump's rival. However, the lack of funding and a series of mistakes made during the campaign meant her star, which had started out strong in the primaries, eventually faded. Even so, Joe Biden, after being named Democratic candidate and perhaps after the conflict and tension produced by the assassination of George Floyd, Floyd made this decision.
Joe Biden's vice president pick, Kamala Harris.
And so, finally, after Trump's defeat in 2020, on 20th of January 2021, Harris became the first woman, African American, and of Indian origin to hold the position of Vice President of the United States. At the time, many saw her as the clear heir to Biden. However, these last 3 years have been a complete slowdown for Harris's stellar career, so absent that today, many are wondering who the hell is Kamala Harris? So, the question is, what the heck happened? Well, let's take a look.
Harris in decline.
Let's be fair, there are a few cases in which US vice presidents have stood out. Few, very few, have managed to be remembered after a few years. However, with Kamala Harris, there had been expectations that this would not be the case. There was an expectation of a 180-degree turnaround in the vice presidency. It was thought that she would have great presence within the government, but unfortunately for her, that has not been the case. Harris came to Washington thinking that she would be the new Dick Cheney, pulling strings at will, and ended up being more like Selena Meyer. If you haven't seen Veep, I don't know what you're waiting for. Unlike some former Democratic vice presidents like Al Gore under Bill Clinton, or Joe Biden under Barack Obama, or even Republican Dick Cheney under George Bush Jr., who managed to have quite a bit of influence in the executive, Harris has not been able to get her own voice. Yet many analysts argue that Harris has strictly complied with what is normally expected of a vice president, which is nothing more than not overshadowing the president. Traditionally, the position of vice has been neither the most brilliant nor a great springboard. In fact, in the last 50 years, only 2 vice presidents were later elected president: George Bush Sr. and Joe Biden himself. Well, there was also Gerald Ford, who came to the Oval Office on the rebound. So for many, the absence is not so strange. It's quite normal. Viewed from this perspective, Kamala could have fulfilled what is expected of the position. In fact, despite that apparent absence, Kamala has been key to the Biden administration repeatedly, especially in the Senate, where she has broken quite a few ties.
Kamala Harris breaks record of tie-breaking votes in the Senate. The vice president has provided the decisive vote of the Senate 32 times in a reflection of Democrats' narrow majority and broader polarization in politics.
In fact, her tie-breaking vote was absolutely decisive in moving forward one of the Biden administration's major measures, the $2 trillion post-pandemic economic stimulus plan. What's more, she has also managed to get all of President Biden's nominees confirmed in both Congress and the Senate, something that has been key to moving the administration's agenda forward. And if that weren't enough, Harris has played a larger role in the White House foreign policy than might appear at first glance. For example, in these 3 years, she has visited almost 20 countries and met with more than 100 world leaders. In fact, Harris was not only instrumental in normalizing diplomatic relations with France in 2021, but was also the one who, in early 2022, warned Zelensky of the impending Russian invasion of Ukraine. However, all this activity has come to nothing compared to the public perception of her being missing and the barrage of criticism she has received since her appointment. And for many, this poor political performance has had a lot to do with her ambition. For example, just 6 months after taking on the vice presidency, she was criticized for not wanting to visit the southern border directly to push for measures to alleviate the immigration crisis. Let's just say that Kamala Harris didn't want to taint herself with those issues. Then, after her resounding failure in her interview with NBC's Lester Holt to explain the situation, confidence in her plummeted. By November 2021, her approval rating stood at just 28%, making hers one of the most unpopular vice presidencies in history. On top of that, Harris has also been dogged by accusations of allegedly creating an extremely toxic work environment around her, bordering on harassment. And many link this situation to the resignation of key members of her team during the first year and a half of her tenure. To make matters worse, Harris has had some particularly embarrassing moments at public events, where nonsensical phrases have gone viral, which, of course, the opposition has exploited in order to ridicule her. And all of this explains why Harris's approval rating throughout 2023 stood at just 32%. However, in recent months, her team and she herself have set a goal to relaunch her image in the face of a key issue in the 2024 elections: President Biden's advanced age. Listen up.
The Democrat key?
At the end of April 2023, Biden finally announced his decision to run for re-election. Alongside him, as expected, would stand Kamala Harris. The problem is that if this happens, the election campaign will be dominated by a very specific issue: Joe Biden's age. You see, if re-elected, Biden would become the oldest president-elect in the history of the country at 82. So many already doubt the real ability of the current president to complete a second term. That would theoretically end at a whopping 86 years. Precisely for this reason, all the spotlights are, this time, fixed on Kamala Harris. In fact, the Republican Party is already saying it loud and clear. A vote for President Biden is a vote for President Harris. And that is exactly the same reason Harris and her team have been working hard in recent months to try to improve public perception of one of the most unpopular vice presidencies in history. Of course, this is not entirely new. It was as early as June 2022 when Harris saw an opportunity to relaunch her image again after the Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade, which resulted in the elimination of the right to abortion that the court itself had upheld for the past 50 years. Well, the vice president became one of the main voices against this decision and ended up being crucial in exploiting this case in favor of the Democrats. That improved her image, but it was not enough. That's why in the last year, she has been touring different universities around the country to consolidate the youth vote, with an agenda focused on issues such as abortion, the environment, and LGBT rights. At the same time, Harris has been raising her more combative aspect again. And the truth is that the data seem to indicate that the plan is working. Her image within the Democratic Party has improved, and many lobbies seem to be betting on her again.
Harris gets her cavalry, top groups to spend $10 million plus to boost her. Emily's list has big plans to defend the vice president before the election. Harris absolutely the best choice for Biden running mate, Newsom.
What's more, it's not just that Harris is improving her image, but that this time history may be on her side if Republicans insist on attacking her. However, Harris cannot claim victory so easily. Despite all her efforts, her popularity level is still at rock bottom. And to top it all off, the vice president carries a deep stain: the immigration crisis on the border with Mexico. You see, since the arrival of Biden and Harris in the White House in 2021, the number of encounters with immigrants at the border with Mexico has been growing exponentially, surpassing the record levels of more than 20 years ago. In fact, between October and December 2023 alone, 730,000 migrants were apprehended right at the border with Mexico. And, of course, news stories like this indicates that the pressure only seems to be increasing.
Massive migrant caravan heading to US-Mexico border is the largest in over a year. May balloon to up to 15,000 people, activist warns.
The office of the vice president, who has been responsible for immigration policy in the Biden administration, has tried to address this crisis by focusing on the major source of this massive migration, the so-called Northern Triangle. The Northern Triangle refers to the area comprising Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. We've already told you here on VisualPolitik on several occasions about the harsh living conditions that exist in these countries: poverty, lack of security, corruption. It is not surprising that it is one of the main sources of immigrants to the United States. Well, Vice President Harris has promoted the so-called US strategy to address the root causes of Central American migration, a strategy endowed with $4.2 billion public and private dollars, which seeks to improve living conditions in these three countries in order to discourage emigration. On top of that, the Biden administration has also held several meetings with Mexican President AMLO to further engage Mexico and has strengthened funding for border security. Yet, it seems clear that these measures, for the time being, are not having any effect. Among other things, because changing the socio-economic reality of several countries is a multi-year process, and because the execution of the plan does not seem to have been the best either. What's more, Americans want quick results in the face of what has become nothing short of one of their greatest concerns. This immigration crisis, along with the inflation crisis, are by far the two biggest assets for Donald Trump's aspirations to take the White House. And they are largely what explains news like this.
Trump leads in 5 critical states as voters blast Biden, Times Siena poll finds. Blow to Biden as poll shows Trump in lead for 2024 presidential election. Trump ahead 47% to 43%, worrying some Democrats as others caution avoiding mad bull disease.
So, you see, Kamala Harris, the vice president, who came in breaking all the barriers, may come to play a key role in the re-election. She has the youth and potential energy that Biden may lack. After a difficult start and the debacle of her political image, Harris wants to regain ground in order to achieve the most coveted goal of all Washington politicians, the Oval Office. But at this point, it's time to hear from all of you. Do you think Harris is the real key to Democratic re-election? How could the current administration deal with the severe immigration crisis at the southern border? Will this crisis be the one that propels Trump back into the presidency? You can leave me your answers in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like the video, like it. I'll see you in the next one. All the best. See you next time.